are continuing with our cybersecurity awareness month agenda. And today we're going to talk about guarding your client's data and some of the stuff you're going to remember from previous weeks. And that's okay, because at the end of the day, the more you remember, the better off you'll be. So let's jump into it. I do anticipate a few more people joining while we're going through this, but that's why we record. So guarding your client's data. Why guarding your client's data is paramount. I mean, it's pretty obvious. Honestly, it's at the end of the day, we have all these compliance, which we're going to talk a little bit about. I'll take HIPAA as the example. With HIPAA, the end goal is to make sure that your client's healthcare data doesn't get exposed. But in reality, it should be very ground floor customer service. You really should not allow for your customers' data, your client's data, to be out there in the world. We're going to talk about, very, very, very high level overview of FTC, the GLBA. I always get that one wrong. GLBA, HIPAA, and a few other CTDPAs, another one, Connecticut DPA. And I was doing some research because I was supposed to have some people from Florida on, and Florida did sign a data protection law into effect. Won't go into effect. They just signed it in June, I believe. It won't go into effect till July of next year. But some of the reasons, besides the obvious, protecting your client's data, some of the other reasons are legal and regulatory compliance. Again, those things like HIPAA. If you do business in Europe, you got to worry about GDPR. Your state compliance laws, and here in Connecticut, we have the Connecticut DPA Data Privacy Act, Connecticut Data Privacy Act, and I do have a link later. I myself and a couple of others interviewed Senator Maroney, I think earlier this year. It's on YouTube. He's the one that championed the bill for Connecticut. You have HIPAA, you have the FTC Safeguards Rule, which is part of GLBA, the Graham-Leach-Bliley Act. There are others that we'll talk about. Trust and reputation. Again, if you are breached, you're going to lose all your trust. You're going to lose all your reputation. Financial consequences. A data breach can be extremely expensive, between remediation, legal costs. If you have a ransomware attack and you have to pay the ransom to get the data back, hopefully you don't do that. You don't have to go down that road. Mitigation for future attacks, because once you have that target on your back, you're now a bigger target. Competitive advantage. By showing the world that you are doing everything you can to protect your client's data, then you have a competitive advantage over some of your competitors. So if I take one of the industries that's notorious for being a little lackadaisical on protecting client data, is the automobile dealership industry. And I have a few clients that are in that industry. The advantage to those clients is they are now way more secure than some of their competitors, because we've instituted a bunch of procedures to protect the client data. At the end of the day, we've gone through and made sure client data isn't where it should be. We've gone through and made sure people don't have access that shouldn't have access, things like that. Customer retention. If they feel like they are protected, they are more likely to stay with you. Data integrity. If you're protecting clients' data and doing a good job of that, then you ensure its integrity. If nobody can access it, nobody can change that data. Nobody can change the integrity of that data. Business continuity. If something does go wrong, data breach goes wrong, you're able to recover quickly because you have some business continuity plan in place. The data isn't just sitting on one little server in the coffee room and that just blew up, or was hacked or whatever. You can restore because it's been backed up somewhere else. And then you also have an ethical responsibility, kind of what I was talking about. If you are in business and you have client data stored, it is your responsibility ethically to do the best you can to protect that data. Theft of client data often leads to identity theft. We see it all the time. Again, especially in the financial world and the healthcare world, when that data gets out there, it is now a method for them to steal identities. And, there's a saying, data is worth more than gold. To some extent, that is true, especially on the dark web. Certain types of data, especially healthcare data, are very valuable on the dark web, and more valuable in some instances than gold. And they can keep reselling the same data. They can take my data today, sell it to one person, and then tomorrow sell it to someone else. So all of these are the reasons why guarding your client's data is paramount. And I unfortunately see it a lot where data, there's always some method of potential data leakage to a lot of businesses out there. And it could often, it might be something they're not even aware of. Some statistics, Tamar knows I love my scary statistics. Average cost of a data breach last year was 4.35 million. Now, that doesn't mean if a two-person business gets hacked, they're going to be on the hook for 4.35 million. That's the average. So we're going from enterprise all the way down. But a two-person business could very likely be on the hook for tens of thousands or even $100,000 very easily. This is the highest average on record, and the average cost of a ransomware attack, 4.54 million. They usually go hand in hand. Usually a data breach and a ransomware attack are usually tied together, but it is possible to have one without the other. Approximately 70% of breaches in 2021 were financially motivated. They just want the money. And less than 5% were motivated by espionage. And usually espionage is an internal problem. $17,700 is lost every minute due to a phishing attack. We talked about phishing 2 weeks ago, I believe. $17,700 is lost every minute due to a phishing attack. In 2022, it took an average of 277 days, almost 9 months, to identify and contain a breach. So it means hackers are sitting on your network. And again, I don't like to use the word hacker. Cyber attackers are sitting on your network for almost 9 months before anybody knows they're there. And they know they're there because they now launched a ransomware attack or some other malware that now you're like, okay, somebody's here, somebody's doing damage, but at that point it's too late. The likelihood that a cybercrime entity is detected, this one's really scary, and prosecuted in the US is estimated at around 0.05%. That means one in every 2,000, I think that is. My math might not be working, is getting prosecuted in the US. 54% of organizations have experienced a cyber attack in the last 12 months. And 52% say there is an increase in cyber attacks compared to last year. It is going up every year. And I can promise you with AI, as much as we all love AI, is going to increase even more. That's why we have these trainings. That's why we have companies that help with these types of things. Now, 54% of organizations have experienced a cyber attack in the last 12 months. That statistic, I would venture to guess, is actually a lot higher. Some businesses might not realize they have been attacked or that they are being targeted. If you get a phishing email, that is a cyber attack. 75% of respondents said they've experienced a significant increase in security incidents, most often due to credential theft, ransomware, DDoS, which is distributed denial of service, and lost or stolen devices. So a DDoS attack, maybe you host a website and you're hosting it on GoDaddy. Please don't, but if you do, and GoDaddy is targeted, then your website is impacted by a DDoS attack. If you're using Comcast, I'll use Comcast because that's usually the more common one in this area, and Comcast is attacked by a distributed denial of service attack, then you are impacted if you have Comcast services. And this happens pretty frequently. So some of the compliance laws and rules that, again, very high level overview. I can spend hours and hours and hours on each one of these, but we're not going to do that today. You have HIPAA, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. This was enacted in 1996, and there's been a few updates since, with the primary aim of safeguarding the privacy and security of individuals' healthcare information. It applies to any healthcare business that transmits insurance records electronically, is what it comes down to. So if you are transmitting insurance electronically, you do fall under HIPAA. But again, even if you don't, you have a bare minimum responsibility, ethical responsibility, to protect that data anyway. The Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, I touched on that a little bit. GLBA, also known as the Financial Services Modernization Act of 1999, is a federal law in the United States that primarily focuses on safeguarding the privacy and security of consumers' non-public personal information within the financial services industry. The definition of financial services industry is very gray, because you automatically think banks and tax prep and accountants and things like that. But this also covers things like auto dealerships and insurance agencies and even payday loan services, as much as we all hate them. There's probably a few dozen types of businesses that are covered under this. I do have a recording about this, the FTC Safeguards Rule update from this past June or July, June 9th, I believe it was. The recording's on our YouTube channel. I'll share the link with you later, but you can understand better what that covers. The Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, FERPA. This one is about the educational system. This was enacted in 1974. So notice 96 for HIPAA, 99 for GLBA, and 74 for FERPA. These acts have been around for decades, but what has changed in decades? In 1974, computers were almost non-existent for the general public. So a lot has changed, and is federal law in the United States enacted in 1974 that safeguards the privacy of students' educational records and grants certain rights to students and their parents with regards to these records. FERPA applies to educational institutions that receive federal funding, which is almost all public school systems, and some private K through 12 schools and institutions of higher education. The educational system is the most targeted industry in the world for these cyber attackers. I don't know if it's COPA or COPPA, but the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, I think we're all pretty familiar with this, but a federal law in the United States enacted in 1998, again, 25 years ago, with the primary goal of protecting the online privacy of children under the age of 13. COPA places strict requirements on websites, online services, and operators that collect personal information from children. I was hoping my privacy attorney would be on, but she's not on. If you don't have a privacy statement on your website, you should, and that should include whether or not you collect data from 13-year-olds, hopefully you're not, but what you do with that data and anything related to that. You need to have that on your website. The GDPR, a lot of people think, oh, this doesn't apply to me, that's Europe. Yes, it does if you do business in Europe. There are rules for US businesses that do business overseas, but this is the General Data Protection Regulation. It's a comprehensive data privacy regulation that went into effect in the European Union in May of 2018. It is designed to provide individuals with greater control over their personal data and to impose strict rules and obligations on organizations that process this data. I saw a number somewhere. I don't remember the exact number, but I think it was close to $2 billion in fines they handed out last year. The CTDPA, that's for us here in Connecticut, May of 2022, Governor Nenda Lamont signed Senate Bill 6, an act concerning personal data privacy and online monitoring, also known as the Connecticut Data Privacy Act, or CTDPA, making Connecticut one of the first states to pass a comprehensive consumer privacy law. Other states are starting to follow suit. Currently, I believe there are 6 states. We were one of the first. California was also one of the first. Colorado, and I don't remember who the other 3 are. But on June 6th of this year, Governor DeSantis signed Senate Bill 262 to create the Florida Digital Bill of Rights, the FDBR. The law is scheduled to go into effect on July 1st, 2024. Supposedly, it mirrors GDPR quite a bit. I haven't had a chance to review it yet, so I don't know exactly what it looks like, but supposedly it mirrors GDPR quite a bit. It's only a matter of time before the United States has something similar to GDPR. There's been bills floated around. It just hasn't happened. In my image, oh, okay, it is there. Doesn't show up on my preview. So first, what can we do? What can you do to protect your client's data? So we're only a few things we're going to talk about today. Some of these we've talked about in the past. There are certainly a whole lot more that you can do to protect your client's data than what we're going to talk about today. But this is stuff that even if you don't have an IT department, you can handle on your own. I would say that the first thing, even before what we talk about, that you need to do is a risk assessment. You need to identify where your potential problems could be and address those problems. And then anytime there's a change, you update, you fix those problems, or you add new devices to the network or whatever it may be, then you need to update your risk assessment too. It needs to be done at least once a year, but probably more than that. But the first thing you could do beyond that, beyond a risk assessment, is data encryption and access controls. This is protecting data at rest and in transit. So what does that mean? It means you're protecting data and access controls. Data encryption and access controls are fundamental components of data security, playing a critical role in safeguarding sensitive information. They help protect data at rest and in transit, ensuring that unauthorized individuals cannot access or manipulate. So now you're probably thinking, what does that mean? What does at rest and in transit mean? Okay, so at rest means sitting on a hard drive in your computer or on a server and it's not moving. That data should be encryption, and that's actually pretty easy to do. Macs by default have encryption turned on, and Windows 10 and up have BitLocker. Windows 10 Pro, it has to be Pro for BitLocker, have BitLocker, and you can turn that on. It's not Windows 11. I believe they're trying to make it so it's defaulted. I don't know if they've been successful yet. In Windows 10 Pro, it is not on by default. You do have to enable it, but it's real easy to enable. You just basically right-click on the drive, select manage or turn on BitLocker. I think it's turn on BitLocker, and it'll take you through the steps one step at a time. It's a good idea. I always tell people save the key to your Microsoft account as well as a local printed out copy, just in case something goes wrong. Because if something goes wrong, you can't get into your computer. That data is not going to be accessible. That's at rest. In transit's a little more complicated. What that means is if you are sending an email with sensitive data, that email should be encrypted. And so how do you do that? Well, I can tell you, you can't do that with certain email services. You have to have a professional account with Google or Microsoft or a few other services that are out there. And then there are ways to set up the encryption. You could type in a word before you send the email, in the subject title that'll say sensitive or confidential or something like that, and it'll encrypt the email. And then the person on the other side has to know how to decrypt it. Usually that's by clicking on a link and putting in a password to open it. Not always, though. There are third-party systems that will do this, as well as your data at rest. There are third-party systems that will encrypt that as well. So those are always options as well. The problem with data in transit, so I see this a lot during tax season, is yes, the tax preparer can send the data encrypted and the tax client can open it. They know what to do. They click on the link and put in a password. However, the tax client is more than likely going to send documents back, sensitive information, and they're not going to encrypt it. And you could tell them till you're blue in the face that, hey, you don't send me this type of information via email. Here are the ways you can send it. And somebody inevitably will do it. So that's the problem with that. But as long as you're doing your part and not storing it in email, this is another big problem. This is why phishing attacks are such a huge problem. People tend to store sensitive documents in their email. The encryption algorithms, there are lots of encryption algorithms. Today, the AES, or Advanced Encryption Standard, is one of the better ones. If you have a website, RSA is another one. I'm sorry, I'm trying to read what asymmetric encryption is. RSA, I don't remember what RSA stands for. And transport layer security, TLS, more commonly referred to as SSL, although that's not accurate anymore. It's TLS. That's your websites. When the website loads, you see the little lock, and then HTTPS. That means they have an SSL certificate, or see, I just did it, TLS certificate technically. That means the website is not transmitting data in the clear. Most websites today have this. However, I will give you a scenario where they did not. A lawyer I know wanted to create an account on a basketball forum, and was having an issue with it. And so I logged onto the website, or I connected to the website to see what it looked like and why he was having a problem with it. And the website had no SSL or TLS certificate on it. In fact, the website was built with a web, like a messaging board software from, I believe, like 30 years ago. This website was extremely not secure, insecure. The problem is, if you don't have that HTTPS in the website, the TLS certificate, that website is transmitting data in clear text. If it's transmitting data in clear text, it means it's also transmitting your password in clear text. And if somebody's listening on your network, which is not hard to do, they could then steal your password. And if you use that password anywhere else, you're going to have major problems. Remember, we talked about that last week. Passwords should not be reused anywhere. You should not have the same password on multiple sites. The other piece of that, access controls, are security measures and policies that determine who can access specific data or resources, what actions they can perform, and under what circumstances. Access controls help prevent unauthorized access and ensure that only authorized users can interact with data. So there should be some kind of authentication method. And today, that should include two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication. I had a client ask me yesterday, what are, for their insurance policy, what are the remote access tools that they're using and how are they secured? And so they have multi-factor authentication, and they're also only allowed to access those computers remotely from 2 IP addresses. So conditional access, this is where the M comes from. So two-factor means you have a password and usually some type of code that's generated on your phone. Sometimes it's done through text message. Sometimes it's done through something like a YubiKey, but most often it's an app on your phone. Multi-factor means you have that plus another form of authentication. In this case, they have conditional access where they can only log in from a couple of IP addresses. So they have to be at that location in order to log in. Authorization determines the level of access granted. And then you could have role-based access controls, meaning you assign users to a specific role, and that role determines what they can access. So if you say you have accountants in your business, they should have access to financial information. You assign all the accountants to that role, and those accountants now have access to the financial information. And then all the authentication methods should be audited and monitored. You should routinely go through and look for stale accounts. You should go and make sure nobody's logging in from someplace they shouldn't be. Just as an example, just today I've got alerts for login in Rhode Island from a Connecticut client. It was legitimate, but it's got an alert for it nonetheless. We block out for most of our clients, we block out international logging in. And we also had an alert for a client that had 2 accounts that have not been used in over a year. Those accounts could be dangerous because now if those accounts haven't been used in a while, nobody's paying attention to them, somebody could easily steal them. Employee training and awareness, kind of what we're doing here, educating staff on data security. So you should have training programs in your business, no matter what level. If it's one person all the way up to enterprise type businesses, you should have training. Should be data security training. Develop comprehensive training programs that cover data security best practices, including password management, secure file handling, encryption, safe internet use. You should have regulatory compliance training, and actually it's a requirement for most compliance. You know, if you use HIPAA as the example, they do require training. You should have security awareness training, regularly update employees on the latest cybersecurity threats, such as phishing attacks, social engineering, and malware. Teach them how to recognize and respond to these threats. And that can be done. So we do this. Most of our training is done through one of two training platforms, and they're short videos. You know, they get some multiple times a month and some a couple times, once or twice a month. And they're usually 3 to 4 minutes long, maybe with a short quiz. You could also use real world examples, and I try to do that and try to incorporate real world examples all the time. You could tailor content. So if you have multiple departments within your organization, tailor the content to that department. The IT team is not going to be on the same level as the accountant team, as the marketing team, as whatever other teams you might have. So you need to tailor your trainings to what the tools they may use, and make sure that they're aware of the potential risks with those tools. Simulated phishing exercises. These are fun. I enjoy doing these. You send out fake phishing emails and see who clicks on them, who interacts with them, and then they get a free training. Don't be mean about the simulated phishing. The simulated phishing emails, if I've seen other companies do this, where they send especially this time of the year now, hey, you've got a $2,000 bonus. Click here to accept that bonus, and they click on a link and they realize it's a phishing email. You just, I compare that years ago. A boss of mine gave me a fake scratch off, and I thought I won $2,000, and it was fake. It's the same thing. You're excited. You got $2,000 you can spend on Christmas gifts, and all of a sudden you have nothing. So be nice about it, but at the same time, it should be required at this point. Train on data handling procedures. Educate employees on how to properly handle sensitive data, both in digital and physical forms. For example, physical documents with sensitive information should either be locked up or shredded if you no longer need it. Secure storage, transfer, and disposal practices. There are services out there that do this, but make sure you vet those services, because we've had data breaches that occurred because of those services. Ensure that employees understand the importance of data classification, how to label and protect data according to its sensitivity. And again, for some of those compliance rules, it is mandatory. Incident response training. This one I see a lot of businesses fall short on. So what do we do if there is an incident? There's a malware attack. There's an email breach. There's a ransomware attack. There's data theft. One of the employees walked out with a bunch of data. What do we do? And there should be a formal document for that process. Security policies and procedures. Ensure that employees are familiar with and understand the organization's data security policies and procedures. Provide them with easy access to these documents. Again, it should all be documented, and you should have the help of a privacy attorney for this. Compliance and consequences. Explain the compliances that your business might fall under, and what happens if you fail to comply with those rules and regulations. So, for example, HIPAA usually will warn you first, say, get your act together or else, and then come back in 30 days. And if you haven't done what you need to do, then you get a fine. And the fine, they're usually somewhat based on the size of the organization, but not always. Whereas the FTC, the GLBA, they don't care. They're not going to wait for a breach. They're not going to wait for anything. If they see you're not doing what you're supposed to do, they could potentially level fines on you. Continuous learning. Should always be learning. I've worked in a few different organizations now where they give you one training a year and that's it, you're done. That's not helpful, because 9 months later, I'm not going to remember that training. And the average, this is me in IT, the average employee isn't going to remember that training 9 months later. And then there should be a culture of security. If you foster a culture of security where all employees view data security as their responsibility, this will help protect that client data even further. Encourage them to be vigilant and report security concerns without fear of reprisal. That's important. Incident response plan. Do you have an incident response plan? And I would be curious to see how many businesses really have this, because I don't think many do. But you should establish an incident response team. Everybody likes to point the finger at the IT people, but it's not just the IT people. Somebody, I know people don't like to believe this, but IT people like to sleep. And, something happens in the middle of the night, the IT person might be sleeping. Somebody else also needs to be aware that there could be a potential issue. Identify and designate key individuals responsible for managing and coordinating incident response efforts. This team may include IT personnel, legal experts, again, have a privacy attorney or someone in that world on your team, communications professionals, and senior management. Define incident categories. Clearly define the types of incidents that organizations should be prepared to handle. This could include data breaches, malware infections, insider threats, physical security breaches, and more. And I would add even disaster recovery. Most risk assessment platforms include natural disasters. So what happens if there's a hurricane? What happens if there's fire? Develop incident response procedures, create detailed procedures for detecting, reporting, and responding to security incidents. Specify actions to be taken for each incident category, including containment, eradication, and recovery steps. Incident detection and monitoring. Implement monitoring tools and techniques to detect and alert on potential security incidents in real time. This may include intrusion detection systems, log analysis and threat intelligence feeds, incident classification and severity assessment. Develop a framework for classifying incidents based on their severity and potential impact on the organization. Assign incident handlers based on their classification. A communication plan. Create a communication plan that outlines how and when to notify internal and external stakeholders, including employees, customers, regulators, and law enforcement if necessary. Keep in mind that plan should also include what your local, state, and federal government say you need to do. You have to keep them in the loop. And for example, HIPAA requires that you notify HHS within 60 days of the breach. Data breach notification compliance is what I kind of just touched on. Containment and eradication. Establish procedures for isolating and containing security incidents to prevent further damage or data loss prior to eradicating the root cause of the incident. As an example, if you detect if there's malicious activity detected on a device within your network, that device should immediately be disconnected from the network. Immediately. This prevents any further spread of that malware or hacker or whatever it is that's going on. Legal and compliance considerations. Work with legal counsel to ensure compliance with relevant laws and regulations. Legal experts can provide guidance on preserving evidence, managing liabilities, and fulfilling reporting requirements. Recovery and remediation. This is where a lot of that expense comes in. Legal, recovery, and remediation. Develop a plan for recovering systems and data affected by the incident. This may involve restoring from backups, patching vulnerabilities, and implementing security improvements to prevent future incidents. Post-incident review and documentation. There should always be a debriefing on this and what you're going to do in the future to prevent future attacks. Training and awareness. Again, that's part of the post-incident review. And continuous improvement. That should be ongoing, no matter if you've been breached or not. Continuous improvement. That's where the risk assessment comes in. What can we do to improve this going forward? And then vendor relationships, third-party risk assessment. You should also make sure that anybody who has access to your data, so in the case of HIPAA, that's the business associate, that's any party that works within your organization that may intentionally or unintentionally come in contact with sensitive information. You need to have this in place, and I'm going to show you some examples on the next slide of recent attacks that involve third parties. So identify and assess third parties, create a comprehensive inventory of all third parties with whom the organization shares data or relies on for services, categorize third parties based on a level of risk they pose to data security and the business, and due diligence and vendor selection. Make sure you're thoroughly vetting those vendors that you work with, and then perform a risk assessment, or you should have a requirement for that business to also have a risk assessment when you're working with them. You should have contractual agreements in place so that they know what they're agreeing to before they can work with you. And then ongoing monitoring. Again, pay attention to what they're accessing. Make sure you have the same access controls that you would have for your internal employees. Incident response and reporting should be in place for third parties. Security standards and policies, data classifications, all the same things we just covered. Encryption and data protection, termination and exit strategies, what happens if you do decide to cut ties with that third party. And then cybersecurity insurance, this should be a requirement. They should have cybersecurity. Everybody should have cyber. If you work with a computer that connects to the internet, you should have cybersecurity insurance. If you work with a smartphone, same thing. Training and awareness for the third-party vendors. Make sure that they are also being trained, and continuous improvement with them too. Some recent events. SolarWinds. So SolarWinds, probably 4 or 5 years ago now, they were breached through an FTP server that allowed the attacker to gain access to their update server. And then they edited the code on the update server, and the update got pushed out to anybody that was using SolarWinds that allowed the update to go through. And then those organizations were hacked. So this was SolarWinds, mostly enterprise type businesses. I think the biggest one was, I think Microsoft might have been on that list of businesses. There were some government agencies, a few other large organizations that were compromised as a result. Well, SolarWinds popped up again recently because they had a massive bunch of vulnerabilities that may or may not have been exploited. Nobody's sure yet. They have since released a patch for that. The attackers in the first event were on their network for quite a while. Some are saying 2 years. So they were there for a long time, moving around the network, probably trying to see what else they can get a hold of. SolarWinds does have multiple companies underneath their umbrella. So they were probably trying to see what else they can get into. Supposedly, the way they got in was a weak password on the FTP server. But I've also heard phishing attacks, so I don't know for sure. Okta, which is an authentication service, has popped up a few times. Again, more recently, so SolarWinds was 18,000 customers of SolarWinds were impacted by that update a few years. I think it was 4 or 5 years ago now. Okta attackers managed to breach identity and access management company Okta's support system using stolen credentials and extracted valid customer session tokens from uploaded support files, according to a report by the firm. Now, they claim not too many people were impacted by this. Again, no way to know for sure. This is a pretty fresh one, so probably won't know the outcome of that for a few months at least. But stolen credentials, this is why we say don't reuse credentials, because it's very possible that the reason those credentials were stolen was those were reused from somewhere else. And then the Move IT transfer, or Move It transfer web apps. This is the big one from this year. Were infiltrated by malware that was used to steal sensitive information from databases impacting over 600 businesses and still counting. They still have not determined the total outcome of this, the total fallout from this. A lot of those businesses were in healthcare. So Move It, and it happens a lot with these types of services, is a file transfer service. And I don't know what it is with these services, but they tend to be a problem and often get compromised. And as a result, all these organizations using it are moving data back and forth. They don't take the file down. They don't take the service down to update it. And now all of the data is exposed. This happened, I believe that was maybe Experian. One of those credit bureaus was hacked like that too a few years ago. So these are just recent events. I'm sure if I did some more research, I'd find plenty more, but I have some websites here. I'll put them in the chat so that you don't have to try to, whoops, that's not what I wanted to do. I'll put them in the chat before we disconnect. But the Connecticut website for the CTDPA, there's a lot of FAQs on there. So if you're not sure, you know, if you need to report or what the rules are, whatever, this website will help you with that. The interview that we did with this was through the New Haven County Bar Association. We interviewed Senator Maroney, who championed this CTDPA, and in the updates to it, which just came out earlier this year. We also have one on the FTC safeguards rule on YouTube. And that's it for my free stuff today. Questions? Oh, I lost some people.
I know. I think I may be the solo. I'm agreeing with everything that you're saying, by the way.
I saw the head bob.
Yeah, it's like, oh my God. No questions, but thank you. It's really informative, and I think, you know, we need to get more businesses understanding that this is out there everywhere. And in fact, as you were talking, I got something on my phone. It's like, yeah, no, deleting that.
Oh,
So,
the texts, and it's out of
oh my
control
God, the
with that
text.
stuff.
Yep.
Yeah, it is really bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, like I said, with AI, again, AI is great. It actually helped me develop the outline for this training. So
Okay.
AI is great, but at the same time, it's going to be used for malicious reasons. It already is.
Exactly.
Yeah. And as always, where you can find us on the web. We don't do scams on the web. It's our new motto.
Well, thank you. Really
Thank you.
appreciate it.
I'll give you about 10 minutes back to your day.
Oh, okay. Sounds
Hopefully
good.
I'll see you. Actually, I'll see you next Tuesday.
Yes, you will. Next Tuesday. Yes. I just
See you there. Thank you.
take care. Bye-bye.